Hello there, everybody. This is Jay Frost, and I want to welcome you to How to Raise, the weekly CFRE accredited program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you through the generous sponsorship of our friends at DonorSearch. We won't be talking much about DonorSearch today unless our guest presenter chooses to mention them for some reason, but that's not for any lack of appreciation. This is, as you may know already, the 10th season of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Underwritten by our friends at DonorSearch. And you can see much of that programming, along with a recording of today's show, on their website at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. And you'll see links to that in the chat, just as you saw at the beginning of the program, and you'll see again at the end. You'll also find links to all of our content, not only there, but also on the DonorSearch YouTube channel. And that'll be dropped in the chat for you today as well. Now, you know that we've taken a little brief vacation here, so I'm really glad that you can make time to join us as we ramp up this fall. Roll up your sleeves and get ready to do the work that we all need to do with increased energy given our current fundraising environment. And we've got a wonderful session today to help you do exactly that. Today's episode is on 4 types of giving, how to meet donors in their giving journey, with the insightful Brian Gower, who is a CFRE. And in this session, he'll explore how giving doesn't just accelerate overnight. Most donors go through stages, as he will show you: transaction, relationship, lifestyle, transformation. We'll learn how donors adopt your mission over time and the behavioral incentives or nudges that are important, donor psychology tools that can help them along the way. Now, before I introduce Brian fully, I want to encourage you to participate today. So since you may be rusty like I am after a month abroad, I want to go ahead and tell you to jump in there in the chat if you haven't done so already and say hello. It would be really wonderful, not only for me and for Jack, who's our producer here, but really for our presenter, Brian Gower. So if you could just say hello, maybe which part of the country or perhaps the world that you're from, which organization you're with, what you do, any of that information is so helpful as we jump into the session today. So do warm up that space. It's also a great way for you to get to know one another. And one of the great benefits of these sessions, live as well as recorded, is getting to know other people in the field, what their challenges are and how they're addressing them. So I want to thank people like, it looks like Alicia, and Daniel and Meg and Jennifer and Karen, who are already warming up that space. It's great to see you here from all the way from Ottawa, just speaking with a Canadian friend just a few minutes ago, Abington, Pennsylvania, beautiful Chicago, absolutely, let's keep it that way, Pittsburgh, Portland, Fort Worth, Monterey. Great to see you all here, and all of our other friends who are going to also join you in that space. You can use that to talk to one another. We also want to encourage you to use the Q&A today. So please do that. The Q&A is a great way to ensure that we don't miss your questions and that we can share those with our presenter. One more housekeeping note before we begin is that there's going to be a survey at the very end today. That is our best way of finding out what you want to see and hear from us in this series as we go forward. So please do fill that out. It will only take you about, in fact, 30 seconds. Write as much or as little as you want, but just do let us know what you think, not just about today's show, but what you want to see, again, coming up in the weeks and months ahead. And one final note, because this is always a question that people ask, will you get a copy of the slides and is there a recording? The answer is yes to both. You're going to receive an email, if you're here with us live today, coming to you in the next 48 hours or so with a link to the recording and to the slide deck, courtesy of our presenter, Brian Gower. So you can thank him for that, but you can also be on the lookout for it. If you don't see it, it means it's gone to your spam folder. But if you ever need a copy of that or want to talk to us at all, you can always reach out to me, Jay Frost. You can reach me on LinkedIn, and you can reach me through our sponsor, DonorSearch. My email address there is jay@donorsearch.net. We'll make sure to include that in the chat as well, so you can reach out to me about anything you want. Now, I want to introduce you, if in case you don't already know him, to today's presenter, Brian Gower, CFRE, who's consultant and director of business development at Johnson Gross Nickel & Associates, better known to many of us now as JGA. With a background in data analytics and a passion for philanthropy, Brian helps clients harness the power of data to drive their fundraising efforts. He brings more than 25 years of higher education experience in donor engagement and development. And before joining JGA, He spent 10 years as, I think it was 10 years, as VP for research at Russell Noah Levitz, another storied firm, where he became known as a national expert on fundraising trends, engagement, and donor behavior. He also created the widely followed Fundraising Voices podcast, and he can tell you all about that later. Earlier in his career, Brian served, among other things, as director of development for the Illinois State University College of Fine Arts. So he's been in a seat not only as a consultant advising many, but also knows what it's like to be where you are. He is deeply engaged in the advancement profession and volunteers with CASE. I could go through all the thing, but I'm not going to do that. Rather, I would like to turn the baton over to Brian. Brian, thank you so much for being here today and sharing.
Well, and thanks, Jay. And thanks to everyone who's able to join us today. And Jay, thank you for your extraordinary commitment for a long time now in thought leadership and bringing voices of new ideas to our field. And Jack, thanks behind the scenes for all the help. So what I'll do here is I'll kind of get things started, and I'll begin a little bit by sharing my story. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what's behind why people give. And we'll jump into that. So I'm going to start to share here. Make sure we get this working. Gonna start the slideshow first, and we'll get it. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, I hope you can see everything real well there. So we're going to talk today about the idea of 4 types of giving. Okay. Now, there are probably 16 million types of giving, but I'm going to group some donor psychology research, behavioral economics, and other things into 4 buckets for you that should really help you think about something we're going to talk about more than once in this presentation: behavioral incentives. So how are you providing behavioral incentives to move donors forward in their journey? Start by just sharing a little bit about myself. That is the picture of my actual license plate. I spend all my time, when I'm not out listening to live music, studying why and how people give to causes and nonprofits. I'm privileged, as Jay said, to work for JGA, a national consulting firm that has worked with over 600 clients all over the US and a couple other places as well too, on things like campaign preparation, doing feasibility studies, ongoing counseling campaigns, and increasingly working with organizations to predict the best possible donations. And as Jay said, I've been a major gift officer. I was an annual fund director in a really successful $3 million annual fund at my alma mater, Knox College. And I got to a point as I was moving forward with my career where I started to say, there needs to be more people looking at donor behavior and donor motivation at scale. And it's really only been about 15, 20 years where there's been major investment in that type of research. Of course, some of that comes from the great Lilly School of Philanthropy here at IU in Indianapolis. Other researchers have jumped into the fray, and I'll invoke some of them here. But we're starting to learn more and more about why donors give, okay? And I can tell you something pretty bold. And that's what we're coming to realize, is that fundraising isn't about money. We're going to talk a little bit today about the things that it is. I'm going to share with you some research, and I'm going to walk through sort of a donor psychology journey. Now, as we go into that, I want to give you one caveat. What I'm going to do for the next 40 minutes or so is a gross oversimplification of thousands of pieces of research. So it's a gross oversimplification of behavioral economics, a gross oversimplification of donor psychology. And if you want to see some of the sources, or you want a little bit more, you want to become a giving geek more and more like I have, I'm happy to talk with you afterwards. But what I'll share with you is that the things that I'm going to share with you today really move along the continuum of psychological progression that is also tied to things like racial identity development, moral development, even sports psychology. Okay, so these are very common concepts that are used in this sort of human development world, which my educational background is. Okay, so let's first talk about one key question that we're often asked as a group, and it's like, what is the top reason why donors give? And for decades, we were trained as fundraisers to answer because they were asked. Okay. Now, it's certainly true that in order to get donations, you do have to ask. I'm not suggesting that if you don't ask, magically philanthropy is just going to appear. But recent research, and this is from the Bank of America study of high net worth givers, tells us that that idea that giving just because you're prompted is really a bit dated. When Bank of America asked really high net worth families about their giving, the first things that they talked about at the top of the list were really believing in the mission of an organization. Okay. Secondly, believing that a gift can make a difference. For their personal fulfillment, giving back to the community. So all these things were much higher rated by high net worth families than that final piece, which is when you are asked. Okay. And that's because what we're finding is that Americans in particular are increasingly becoming strategic givers. So they're thinking about a philanthropic plan, the impact they want to have in the world, and the organization or the fundraiser, maybe give you a little bit of hard truth here, is a bit secondary now to that. Okay. People are very philanthropic. They want to give, they want to make a difference, they choose causes over time. But to get to those cause choices, people really need kind of a prompt or a reason to move forward in their cause adoption. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk with you a little bit about this idea of 4 types of giving. Okay. And again, the gross oversimplification of the human development field here. So I'll give you that caveat, but I came up with these 4 words after talking to a number of fundraisers and reading a lot of stuff about this. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the idea of transaction, relationship, lifestyle, and transformation. So let me begin by going through the transaction side. Okay. So your transactional donors might be those donors who are giving for the first time. Maybe they were asked by a friend. Okay. So I know some of the organizations that I saw in the chat here do things like runs or biking events or relays. And maybe somebody gets asked at work, will you sponsor my relay team, right? For the most part, you really wouldn't expect those people to know that much about the cost. They're doing it because their friend asked them. Still very powerful. Peer-to-peer fundraising is very powerful. But at this stage of giving, you can't, as a fundraiser, assume that people even know what they're giving to, okay? We see in higher education sometimes senior giving campaigns, people who are about to graduate at their higher education institution. We'll do things, well, just give $1 so we can count you in the total. Okay. That's pretty transactional, right? And then the incredible example that we've seen, and I think we're probably within a year be at over $1 billion in documented checkout giving. So that's like, when you round up and add to the cause, we see, causes, we see McDonald's, Ronald McDonald House International, one of my clients at JGA, people round up when they're getting food at McDonald's, right? And the last survey, 84% of Americans said they had done that in a year. I actually think it's probably higher because I think people sometimes accidentally press the button. So the documented actual behavior is probably even higher than 84%. But again, this giving is pretty quick in its decision making. Most people are giving because, oh, that sounds like a good idea, or you're doing your relay team and that's fine. But they don't necessarily know that much about the cause. Okay. Over time, people will develop a relationship with an organization. This is where we start to see relationship-based giving. One point I want to make here is that in some cases, people start at the relationship-based stage. A family, for example, that has had a child that has gone through a medical situation and hopefully is still with us, if they then adopt the national or international organization associated with that medical issue, they're definitely at the relationship stage during their first gift, right? They're very emotionally tied and they know the why of that giving, okay? So just want to make sure you understand that sometimes people will start right from that relationship, okay? These are the people who generally have given more than once or will give more than once. They could probably tell you if a random person asks, and what is the mission of that organization that you give to, they could probably tell you, at least a sentence or so about it. Okay. Interestingly, We see relationship-based giving, so with a little bit more knowledge and understanding, often in volunteer peer solicitation. So many of the organizations here, I imagine, have board members who will ask a friend to contribute, or they'll provide you with an opening for a meeting, right? That's pretty relationship driven, okay? Also people who give really through their network. So maybe it's in the workplace, maybe it's through a faith network, right? There's different versions of that. And again, as I mentioned, people who are personally impacted by the cause. So at this stage of cause adoption, people know a bit more about the cause. They could probably tell you what they're giving to. They might even be able to tell you the why. They probably have done some discernment of, if I really care about the environment, I choose this organization over this organization because of a focus on this or that, right? Or maybe it's locality based, right? Okay, so these are the people who have started to build a little bit more understanding and relationship, the key word there, with your organization. Now, I'm going to ask you all a question about the next stage. I imagine some of you have donors who will do things like call you very close to your fiscal year end deadline, maybe after they saw a social media post, or if they've got a reminder, to give, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, did I get my gift in this year? I want to make sure I didn't forget," or, "Oh God, I would hate to not be on the list." When people cross over into that phase of a personal expectation that of course they would give, they're in the lifestyle stage, okay? So these are people who might be recurring donors, okay? Not suggesting here, by the way, that all monthly givers are lifestyle-based givers. There might be very transactional monthly donors. We see in Indianapolis here, for example, some groups out on the sidewalks asking people to sign up for monthly giving, say, for example, for breast cancer research or things like that. Some of that is probably pretty transactional. Most of those donors who make those quick decisions, even if they're doing it in a recurring way, probably couldn't give you a speech about the organization. But people who have bought into multi-year pledges, they've decided to become a leadership donor because you've reached out to them, or something's happened in their life and they've just done that, but after reading your content and things like that. They check in proactively. They would never miss a year, okay? These are the people who now might be serving as volunteers, and this is really powerful. If you have a group of volunteers in your nonprofit or your mission and a group of non-volunteers, you should see a giving rate of 3 to 5 times the amount and the frequency that you see from non-volunteers with your volunteers. Okay, and that's because the gift of time and attention, preempting a little bit what I'm going to get to near the end here, is one of the biggest things that people can give today, right? So your volunteers, rather than being I give with my time versus my money, are some of your best possible prospects. In fact, when we did a survey of American higher education alumni, the National Alumni Survey, which is led by Howard Hebner, my dear friend, what we found is that over 3/4 of leadership and major givers were also volunteering. And that's a huge shift from several decades ago, where most nonprofits would separate their volunteers from their big givers. Like, we wouldn't ask the big givers to also volunteer. So we're seeing, as we look at cause adoption research, a real mingling of those things, okay? These are also the people, by the way, that choose to attend an event. And I won't go real deep into it, but I'll tell you, ticketing agencies and venues are having a lot of trouble getting people to sign up in advance for events. Like, getting people to actually physically come to a thing in a reliable way is a bigger deal than it was even 5 years ago. A lot of that is the impact of the pandemic, but it's also the fact that we have access to be social on our phones, right, in our pockets, right? So these are the people who have made giving really part of their lifestyle. Okay. And then finally, we've got the people who take the leap to transformation. These are those major givers that distribute a significant portion of their wealth, the plan givers who distribute a significant portion of their legacy, could even be, by the way, those corporate leaders that help you get a corporate gift, right? We like to say all giving is individual, because even in the corporate or foundation world with grantors, a person has to say yes, right? The head of that foundation, the person in charge of the giving, the committee has to say yes. So this transformation is really about donors taking a leap there is a documented, and I'll talk a little bit about this with the great research from Russell James at Texas Tech. There's a leap that takes place here where donors kind of move psychologically and socially into another category. Okay. So what I want to tell you is that generally speaking, we don't see that transformative giving unless we see some of the previous types of giving. Okay. The idea that you will stumble upon major gifts or have no engagement with somebody, or they would have no engagement with you, and then all of a sudden they're doing major wealth distribution is a bit of a myth. Really in the range of less than 5% of organizations' major gifts would be sort of surprises, okay? And almost always, if you trace the story back, even with a surprise bequest, what you can find is that there's a path that donors took to get there. Now, want to also share with you that particularly in the relationship and transaction stages, donors can move back and forth. Okay. An example of that is that you might have a donor that's, starting to become pretty reliable in their annual giving. If you do a quick campaign where maybe you have a crowdfunding based effort or something in that style, you might see a donor who's in the relationship stage make a very quick transactional gift, right? Also, we can see people slip backwards if they're not given the best stewardship, okay? But I just want to basically communicate that this is a path, okay? Now, what I'm going to tell you now is something pretty bold. The number one mistake that organizations make is that they provide the wrong behavioral incentives to move people to the next stage. And to invoke the incredible Daniel Kahneman, father of behavioral economics, behavioral incentives aren't everything. They're just almost everything. Okay. So we're going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about what are the correct behavioral incentives to cause someone to move forward in their adoption to your cause. Okay. So let's kind of go through and just talk a little bit about, those specific kind of areas. All right. So the truism that we can say at the transactional stage is that most organizations spend too much time in this stage over explaining the why and the reason for giving. I'm not saying don't abandon mission communications in donor acquisition. That's not what I'm saying. But there's this kind of idea that, okay, well, if we're going to acquire these donors, we're going to have to explain what we do with their money, and we're going to have to send them 3 emails and videos, and all that stuff is great. And then then there's a button, and people click on the Give Now button, and there's a gift form that takes 6 minutes to fill out. Okay. At the transactional stage, the most important thing to do is to make it easy to give. Okay. And I would say that where most donor acquisition and new donor identification programs fall down is on that particular issue. Your giving page for a first-time donor should take less than 1 minute to complete. Okay. And that's because we can buy things on Amazon in 6 seconds, right? Now, the charitable world will never be at the exact frictionless stage of the commercial world. We don't need to be quite where the commercial world is. But generally speaking, when we've done studies of giving pages and the method for giving takes about twice as long as it should. Okay. I can give you an example on the leadership and major gift side as well, too. I imagine many of you have pledge agreements and donor agreements. I would tell every organization that they should have a single page donor pledge agreement that kicks off the giving process for a leadership or major gift. Really, really low friction. Okay. Now, you might do an expanded donor. You can mention, this is an informal pledge that will lead to a larger agreement. You're going to work with their lawyers, naming rights, all those sorts of things. But what you want to do early in the process of booking even a major gift is reduce friction on the front end. Think of different ways that you can make it just easier to give. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to do as well, too. And I want to just talk for a moment about the world of options and something we call decision paralysis. And decision paralysis is that thing that every 4-year-old experiences when they walk into the cereal aisle. Oh my God, there's so many things, right? I want this, and I want this, and I want this. Okay. So we do need to be careful early in the giving stage to kind of just tell donors what you want them to do. Now, you want to be flexible. You want to provide options like a recurring gift versus a one-time gift. But do that in a mode where you serve up the thing that you want them to do as the easiest. So I'll tell you, in a gift array, so check the box to give 50, 100, 250, 500. Vast majority of people will choose the first option that you provide. So one of the things that you could all do tomorrow to increase your fundraising, if you have a gift array, which is 100, 250, 500, 1,000, either in your online form or if you're doing some direct mail, things like that, flip it around. Put the larger number first. Now, donors are then going to look at that. Many won't be able to give that $1,000, but you will actually, as a result of flipping that array around, get more 250s. Okay, because you've put in the visual scan the $250 closer to their eye rather than the 100. And there is a bit of a psychological thing where people don't want to choose the lowest or last amount. Okay, so that's an example of, in the transactional phase, how you can really reduce friction. Okay, now the biggest thing in the transactional phase today is matching challenges, giving days, and time-based giving. Okay, and what we call that in the marketing world is manufactured urgency, right? Just because your giving day is on a specific day, you still need money 364 other days of the year, but you've chosen that day to really rally support and get attention. Okay, matching challenges have been shown by the incredible John List at the University of Chicago to basically double donor response. And what I can tell you is that John List also found that there was no statistical difference between a doubling and tripling versus a simple one-to-one match. Now, that's not to say don't do the doubling and tripling, because that can be a fun marketing thing. It can inspire the major donor in some fun ways, but there's not going to be a massive difference in response between matching and doubling and tripling. And the reason for that is that what these things that I talked about, giving days, matching challenges with a deadline, answer the second question. So for the most part, we're answering the question, why give? These tactics, these friction reducing tactics and time-based tactics, answer the question, why give now? Okay, so just think about that with your donor acquisition program. If you do those things, you're going to make it a more joyful, frictionless experience for donors, and more of them will move into the relationship phase. Now, at this point, when donors have made maybe their first gift, or you've come across some people that you think might have affinity for you, and you're going to try to start them off in the relationship phase, you got to spend a lot of time telling your story. You also want to, during this phase, tell the donor story. So if a great thing you can do is in your annual appeal, sometimes those are done around the holidays, sometimes those are done around specific milestones for the organization. Share with the donor how much they've given to date. Okay, or thank you for being a donor for the last 3 years, or really interesting study that was done by Adrian Sargent in the UK on response when people called into public radio stations. Use the words donors like you. Okay. And what they found in that study is that when there was a social anchoring, so telling the donor story in reference to another social group, the donors gave about 30% more, and the effect lasted for over a year in terms of persistence in their giving. Okay. So you want to really focus in this relationship stage, once people have gotten started with you, on social engagement. Okay, that's definitely a social media thing. That could be things like special networks that you provide for donors. Okay. Think about in this phase, as you tell your cause and why give story, to do a mix of win framing and loss framing. Okay, and I'll just spend a moment on that. Win framing is the tactic of saying, if you give, we will be able to do the following. Okay, so every gift of $300 to Smile Train facilitates a life-changing surgery for someone with cleft palate. And it's truly life-changing. And I'll have to check again, but I think there was a point where they had gotten it, in that range. That was one of the real innovations of Smile Train. Okay, so if you give, we can do this. Loss framing is really about if we don't address this issue, the following could happen. Classic example of loss framing that I have complicated feelings about is the depiction of people in famine. And there are a number of nonprofit organizations that have been around for decades that use some pretty disturbing images of where people are at in the world and how the gifts would make a difference. And if they don't, maybe people will die. Okay. Generally speaking, I think win framing is going to be the more powerful, but there is documented evidence to show that some people gravitate a little bit more towards loss framing. So you probably want to do some mix of that type of messaging. Okay. I'm going to now just talk a little bit about volunteers. This is a key way that we see organizations fall down a little bit in the cause adoption cycle in their use of volunteers. And it's, okay, we're going to get a group of volunteers together and let's have a committee meeting. And what do we want to do to meet this challenge? So you engage your volunteers, I think as you should, and I'll talk when the right phase of that is, to get their opinions. At this stage of cause adoption, you should be telling your volunteers exactly what you want them to do. So on the giving day, here is a pre-written social media post that we need you to post in this time window. Will you please contact these 3 people? So we call that volunteer facilitation. The reason we want to tell volunteers exactly what we want them to do is that the volunteers are at this phase learning how to be volunteers in many organizations. And what can happen if you make things a bit more amorphous or conversational or what do you all think? What ends up happening there is you see a lot of volunteers not do anything because they're just they don't know what to do. But many of them would come out and sort food. They would send an email to 3 friends or colleagues. They would repost a social post. All that can be very powerful. Here's a very powerful thing that you can do in volunteer facilitation tomorrow that will absolutely amplify your cause's reach. LinkedIn, Facebook, other social media, Instagram, the algorithms are very heavily weighted, particularly on LinkedIn, to network and buzz, timeliness, trendliness, right? So what you can do is if you put out a social media post, say about your giving campaign or a specific challenge or your giving day, ask your volunteers to repost it in a 2-hour window that you define. So the social post is out. Will everyone please repost this in the next 2 hours? And then just tell them, you don't have to add your own thoughts to the repost. Just click that repost button if you don't have time. If you want to say, hey, everybody, I support this cause and I love it, and then the repost with it, that's fine. But just tell them, can you just at least press the repost button? What will happen is if a whole bunch of people that are likely socially connected through various things they do, communities, location, on the B2B side or the LinkedIn side, we see it very powerful because all the fundraisers know each other, right? What you'll see is your post will immediately jump to the top of everyone's feed because the algorithms are seeing a very quick succession and buzz there of people who are connected socially. So that's an absolutely free piece of advice that you can use tomorrow. We call it the Blitz. And you just say, it's Blitz time. We've got the social media post out for the giving day. Can everyone please repost in the next 2 hours, even if you're not going to add anything? That tactic right there will cause your social media posts to go through the roof. And that's an example of telling volunteers something that they can do with just a click that makes them feel good. And then you can share with them, oh my God, we trended, right? All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the lifestyle stage, okay? This is where people could absolutely give you a multiple-minute speech about a cause. They are pretty reliable in their giving, right? These are the people who call and say, I don't want to miss a year, okay? What you want to do here is really shift and bring the donors into an inside view of your organization, okay? So this is, we have elite recognition in much of our donation work. Okay, you're in the Leadership Society. You're giving them VIP access. Here's a quick tip that you could use, again, almost immediately. If you have a regular newsletter every 2 weeks, every month, think about sending it to your leadership givers, or if you're emphasizing recurring giving, the people who are sustainers or whatever word you use, think about sending that newsletter to them 2 days or 3 days early with nothing other than a banner across the top saying for members of the blank club or, okay, really interesting because what then the donors have is they have advanced knowledge, okay? And we did this at a number of higher education institutions. by the way, incredibly effective on the athletic side, right? Where people had gotten announcements in some cases before other people, and they're sitting around. I don't say, I don't know, not a lot of offices have office coolers anymore, but they're talking around the office and they said, "Did you hear about this thing that happened at the organization or the school?" And they go, "Oh no, I didn't." "Oh, you know what? I must have gotten that because I'm in the president's circle." You have therefore manufactured the number one currency for all millennial and Gen Z donors, FOMO. Okay. So by treating your connected and lifestyle and leadership givers with a kind of VIP access, you're bringing them sort of inside the organization. By the way, this tactic of being more transparent and direct with your leadership donors will absolutely help you if you ever face a crisis, whether that's something that happens like a flood or a fire, or if there is an unfortunate situation in your organization. The fact that you've brought more leadership donors onto the inside will really help you get through if there's a storm coming. Okay. This is also where we engage in what I call parasocial contact. And there are organizations, for example, that will hold a webinar or a call, and there's some technologies you can use that actually call out to your donors and say, "Hey, do you want to join this call?" Where a coach or a doctor, right, who's in the medical research side, or maybe it's a live stream with, if you're doing work in other countries. I did see that, I believe I saw an amputee network, for example, where literally we're going live to the tent for 10 minutes to talk about what's going and happening out in the field, right? That parasocial contact, okay, that's a produced piece. People aren't actually talking to Coach K. They're not, they're not talking to Caitlin Clark here in Indianapolis, but they've been invited to a broadcast because they did something special. Is that really incredible thing that we're experiencing with social media for good right now, where that brings people sort of closer to the inside. By the way, at this stage, when people have bought in and they're reliable and they're your mission ambassadors and they're volunteering for you, you can begin to use an assumptive narrative. And that's we know that you know the following. We want to share some more information because of your loyal support. Like, we know that you loyally supportive. You now have permission in this stage to do the assumptive narrative. Anyone on the webinar today has been trained in sales or in convincing people or negotiation. That shift to the assumptive narrative, where the whole psychological frame is based on the idea that everyone agrees that we're going to do this, is incredibly powerful for behavioral follow through. Okay. Now, let's go to that volunteer piece. This is now when, after your volunteers, again, have done, some things. They've been volunteers for maybe a year. They've followed through and done some reposts. They've reached out to friends. This is where you start to ask volunteers, "Can you join a committee and help us craft the strategy?" Okay. So you're absolutely doing that because the more advice you get and the more information you get from your givers is going to improve your fundraising. The advice they provide is incredibly valuable. A big reason why you're doing that is moving them along this psychological continuum to be more involved and engaged. Okay. So then you form the committee. People have been volunteers for 2 years and now they're in the elite. Okay. So I can't see your faces. I hope that you're nodding. You're getting the impression here of what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, the final phase for transformation is very interesting. You've got people at this point that have bought into the cause as part of their lifestyle. They're engaging with you, and you can see that in your data. At this point, when you're making a major gift ask, right, and you're kind of reach out and see if some wealth can be distributed, or if people will step up in their giving. The research on this is really incredible. What you want to do is ask big questions and then shut up. Okay, and I'm not joking. If you've done training from great places like Advancement Resources, now Huron Learning, we're trained to ask questions like, "What would you like to do with your money that would be most meaningful for you?" And then you don't get to talk as a fundraiser, because at this stage, you want donors to take that psychological and cognitive leap to tell you in their own words what they want to affect in the world. Okay. This is where you're going to try to find out what the donor's real passion is. It's research, it's kids, it's workforce development in some cases. Best story I can tell you about this is I once, very early in my major gift career, went out and visited parents with the associate dean at ISU. And we thought we were going to visit these parents who, had some wealth. And asking them for scholarship money, because of course, scholarship money is what universities always want. We want to provide access. And we met with the dad, and we asked the questions like, what would you like to do that would be most meaningful? And there was a pause. And he said, my kid found this program on accident. And we kind of fell for trying to say, tell us more. Like, your marketing is not real good. My kid stumbled upon this program and he loves it and it's changed his life. But he kind of like Google searched and looked around for, and this was arts technology, really interesting program. And he said, can I give you money to do better marketing and recruitment? And of course, the ROI for the college is huge on that, right? Because the investment in marketing and recruitment would get the word out to so many more students and families. Okay, we still need scholarships, but we're probably going to get returned in the 5 to 10x range on an investment in our marketing. But we wouldn't have heard that passion from that donor if we didn't ask a general question and just kind of let them answer, like be quiet and listen. Okay. Now, this leap, this leap, it really is a leap, psychological leap, is documented. And Russell James, a few years back at Texas Tech, and Dr. James is incredible, got planned giving donors and had them monitored through an fMRI, which looks at the areas of the brain where blood flow is increasing, right? And so which area of the brain, like which part of my cognition is working when I'm asked this question? And he asks questions like, what do you think about shopping? And tell me about your life. And like, what do you think about buying? I remember all the list of questions, but so some of the questions were like just like average everyday things. He asked them how they felt about, life after they were gone on this planet. And then he asked questions about major and planned giving. And the same areas activated when planned giving givers and prospects were asked about giving that activated when they thought about their own mortality. So what it coined is this term of symbolic immortality. And literally at the major and planned giving level, what we can see in cognition is that people have moved from a third person narrative to an intense first person narrative that is really tied to how they view their place in the universe. Okay. That confirms something that we've done for years, where we ask donors to leave a legacy, make a difference, right? Okay. So that confirmed it. But this is like literally looking at brain scans. Okay. And you can tell I'm geeking out here, but it's really exciting to think about sort of how that goes. Okay. Now, what I want to share with you is that the overall pattern from transaction to relationship to lifestyle to transformation is moving donors from an extrinsic, I should do this because, oh, I feel guilty or my friend bugged me, right? To an intrinsic, I want to make a difference in the world. Okay. And these behavioral incentives, these things that you do along the way, move donors forward into that continuum. Okay. This is, by the way, how people become better athletes, better leaders. It's a pretty good model of how to raise a kid, actually. Moving from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation, which is more reliable, more intense, and more generous. And by the way, lest you say, oh my God, this behavioral economics and psychology guy taught me how to manipulate people. Okay. When we get donors to move along this continuum, we're doing them an incredible service. People over 50 who have a purpose, who have a thing that they care about, a thing that they're doing, live 6 years longer. Okay. The incredible joy of giving that people feel. I mean, many people I imagine on the broadcast today have had a donor cry when they made a gift. Okay. And I remember talking to my young daughter about this. And she goes, how was your day today, Daddy? And I said, well, a donor cried in my office. And she goes, why did you make the donor cry? And I said, he was crying because he was so happy because he had finally found a purpose in his life. Okay. So this whole system here is really about providing more joy to donors. And by the way, they'll help you raise a lot more money. All right, I'm going to wrap up here and kind of come back to that first statement that I made, which is fundraising is not about money. The old way of looking at advancement and development is, and I'll be a little funny here, well, surely you will give because we feed kids, or surely we'll give because we're saving dogs. Okay. Like you should be loyal to our cause because we're just good. Okay. After you give, we'll thank you and we'll maybe invite you to some events, right? And we'll build a relationship with you. We'll encourage you when you give more and more to network with other big donors, right? And then somebody in a blue blazer for decades, people who look like me, less and less so now, will come to your house and ask you for a big gift, and then you can make your impact. This is the exact opposite way that most donors under the age of 45 today think. Okay. We can see in great research from Giving USA, Lilly School of Philanthropy, and go back to that high net worth study that donors want to have an impact in the world. They then say, okay, on this thing that I care about, kids, dogs, the environment, um, allowing an amputee to, move forward and be able to do all the things that they need to do in the world. I'm going to research and I'm going to check with my friends and find out what are the best organizations through my network. Then I'll get to know more about the organization through many of the things that we discuss, and I'll build a relationship. And from that, my loyalty will come. Okay. That's the way that particularly today's younger donors think. And because it is always true that the way that young people behave creeps upward to the older people like me, it's actually increasingly how we're seeing some boomer donors. Okay. So start thinking about how you can focus more on that idea of initial impact, building a network and relationship, and then getting loyalty from there, rather than assuming that just because you are awesome, and every organization here, I'm sure, does incredible good in the world. Think about how you can build people along that path. Okay. All right. So donors are really changing. Okay. They look to peers for validation, then they look for an organization to help them. They have personal strategies for giving. This is why we see the growth of donor advised funds, family foundations, giving LLCs. Okay. What this means is that as you start to track engagement from donors, you're going to really want to watch, are you seeing these things? Are you seeing increased email clicks? Even if people aren't attending events, are they checking out events, right? Are they signing up for things, right? Are we seeing that in an engagement level as people move forward, okay? And that's really crucial because as donors move along this continuum, okay, they're moving from the outside. And I'm going to invoke John Keith was quoted this at the Foundation for Fraternal Accidents earlier this week, and I loved it. Moving donors from the outside to the inside. By the way, that's what a feasibility study does. Yes, you get really great intel on your potential big donors, right? But along with that, you're also moving donors from the outside of the potential campaign to the inside. You're building trust. You're learning from donors, and donors are learning from you, and you're furthering that personal cause adoption. So again, fundraising isn't about money. It's actually about attention, purpose, and trust. And the degree to which the behavioral incentives and the nudges and the engagement that you provide move donors along that continuum, you will see massive increases in your fundraising. And I'll just close with this point I've been making. My key advice to fundraisers today is if you think about yourself as a convincer, okay, like I'm pitching to donors and they're saying yes or no, really start to think about some different C words. Are you collaborating with donors? Okay, we talked about volunteer engagement. Are you connecting donors to other people? That idea of donors interacting with each other socially or connecting them to things like research. Are you a consultant? Are you working with the donor in that lifestyle stage to say, hey, well, how about we do this from your DAF? Maybe you could do a qualified charitable distribution for your IRA. You might see some tax benefits. Can we talk about funding this program today, but then maybe through a bequest, endowing it? Like, can I consult with you on the plan to make your mission? And then finally, that reducing friction thing. How can you make it easier for donors to find joy in giving? These are the futures of philanthropy. These are the things that we can see in psychological research across all different fields that are really making a difference, nudging donors to do more good. Okay, so those are the 4 types of giving. I hope you got a couple, quick tips. I hope you expanded your knowledge a little bit about how donors adopt causes. And I'll just say, Jay, do we have some questions here?
We do have a couple, but first I want to thank you, Brian, and also find out if you could share how people can reach out to you. Once again, for those who are live, a copy of this slide deck as well as a recording of the session, because there's so much that you shared, will be coming to you via an email. So just be on the lookout for that. But other people may want to just talk to you. So how is the best way to follow your work and reach out to you?
And there you go. Here's my email address. I encourage you to follow me on LinkedIn. I think Jack posted as well too in the chat a blog that I wrote about this, and you can share that with your colleagues. There's actually also an AI generated quick 10-minute overview with AI generates kind of 2 people talking. It's like, Jay, we're in trouble. Us podcasters, right? Here it comes. Here comes the AI. Nobody could ever replace the fabulous Jay Frost with AI, but there is a verbal version that you can listen to in the car or share with a friend that's a little bit more of a kernel of that. And really, just feel free to ask me any questions. I do this all day. It's like 96% of my brain. The rest is probably hot dogs or something like that. But like, you know, that is my actual license plate. So feel free to ask me any question, no matter how weird it is about fundraising. I actually appreciate those questions because it helps me keep a pulse on what fundraisers are asking. What do we have any immediate other questions from the
We
audience?
do, and I'm going to go ahead and read those to you. But first, I just want to share what's coming up in the series and also give people a moment to go ahead and post any other thoughts, comments, questions, or even rebuttals, because a lot of what you were suggesting makes so much sense to me. But I can imagine some people are thinking, well, yeah, but how can I implement that? I have only got 2 people on my team. So we'll get to all that in a second. Coming up next in the series, this Friday, we drop the PM podcast. Speaking of podcasts, this episode is with Dr. Abraham George, who's the founder of Shanti Bhavan and the George Foundation. So it's one of those rare opportunities to talk with someone who's been on that journey to from private business, in this case, Wall Street, all the way through to visionary philanthropy. So you can learn all about that wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And then on Tuesday next week, we'll be back on Frontlines of Social Good at 1 p.m. Eastern, talking about the latest news and stories and with an author interview. And then finally, in this series, How to Raise, it's back to capital campaigns, putting on your oxygen mask first. That's with Ellen Bristol and Dr. Courtney Ladisaw, who will be talking about, of course, how to make sure you are ready before you engage in a campaign. It should dovetail really well with everything you have been sharing, Brian. So if you take that slide down now, we'll go ahead and jump into those questions. And we have, I know, a couple right here. So if I can open that up, where did it go? Oh my gosh.
I see Jen's question. I'll tell you how.
There we go. Yes. So we have a question from Jen. If you do want to share that and just read it before.
Yeah. So Jen brought up here, and this is great. And by the way, she mentions Next After, incredible
Yeah.
fundraising research hub. Okay. So it's a bit of a rebuttal. The idea that gift array with highest amount first results in negative conversion and reduced donations. Okay. I maybe overstated it. Okay. The example that I gave you probably would work best in a pool of donors who might be rated to potentially give those larger amounts. So I'm going to concede and say that. That's the first thing I would say. It can be true that being, sort of pushy or asking high first can have some negative effects. That tends to be the case in very broad new donor acquisition pools with people who are just like incredibly mixed in their resources. Okay, so I'm going to concede and say the strategy that I suggested of putting maybe the $1,000 first might be a smarter thing to do in the second year of donation or with people who are modeled to give more. Now, I want to talk about a key point here, and it's what we call the anchoring effect. And this is, again, great research that John List did, oh God, it might have been 20 years ago, where they looked at phone solicitations. And what they found is that the vast majority of people will give to the first suggestion that's made in terms of amount. So you create kind of a psychological anchor there. Okay. So the thesis of that study is suggestions matter. Okay. So the point that I'm getting to here on this is to say what you suggest is very powerful. You want to probably vary your suggestions based on what you know about the donors. So one of the negative things that they found in that study is if the organizations went with just a standard array, many people who had given, say, 400 or 500, if the first ask was 250, actually downgraded. Okay, so the point I want to make about reducing friction is that suggestions matter, and it's something that you should experiment and play with. I would say a biggest takeaway, there are some kiosk systems, and these are great technologies at events where people can make a very, very quick gift. I'm totally frustrated when those systems begin with $1. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right. So maybe you mix it up a little bit, right? But suggestions matter, and think about that and test that with your audience. Jen, if you want to talk more about that offline, feel free to email, and I'd be happy to look directly at your solicitations.
And just to follow up on that, with regard to monthlies, because we've all seen the data on that, the monthly donation streams seem to do really well, both for retention but also for overall revenue. And first, I should check myself on that. Is that what you're also finding? Is that still true?
Yes, and the thing about that is because the average monthly donor will give for well over a year, right? I mean,
Right.
like absolutely on the revenue side. I would say I would very much caution organizations to consider monthly donations to be autopilot, because if you don't then further engage your audience, you're going to have people stuck in the relationship stage. You're not going to move people to the
Right.
lifestyle stage. So be really thinking about with your monthly giving program. I get that you need to book Rever, and in very large organizations, you just need that reliable revenue. Start to do wealth screening. DonorSearch would be a great option for that. And they're a partner with JGA and some key products that we provide. Start to go into some of the donors who might be able to step up and do more and use some of those lifestyle tactics. So monthly giving, love it, but don't run it on autopilot.
And then one more piece of that, which is that when you come up with that stream, and I know the one you mentioned during the presentation was $1,000 and then 500, et cetera. So moving down that way. What about the starting point? So in other words, wherever that may fall, whether your stream is going one direction or the
Yeah.
other, um, if you can make it so that's dynamic and it's attuned to the donor
Yes.
themselves, and you know, when you mentioned at an event, this is a great example of that, because if you just give them $1 but they're already giving $500, they might feel like, what?
Yeah.
So if your software allows you to make sure that one of those gifts is the one they're already giving, does that make sense? And if so, where should that fall in the stream of options?
The first amount has to be at least what they gave previously or more.
Okay.
Okay, that's just a basic, really kind of marketing tactic. Um, I've seen this in faith-based fundraising, where parishes, in some cases, they kind of just print off envelopes and there's standard arrays, but there's not attention given there to what the family's been giving. Working with one organization right now, where what we did is we're sending an email prior to the high holidays here, and then they're going to have on the card. It's a little complicated how these are done. Can't quite get it. See me at AFP next year. We're going to talk about understanding Jewish philanthropy with some great people. But actually, the options are: would you like to increase by a percentage? Right. So we're actually providing a psychological anchor, not an expectation, but an invitation for people to increase a modest amount, 10%, 20%, 30%, but then also providing amounts that they could give. One of the really interesting anchoring things that we found in the Jewish community is that the 18, people may know about the spiritual value of 18. The organization actually had like 18, 1,800, 3,600, and then 5,000. And I said, why isn't that 5,400? So we think that that shift alone to 3 times 18, 5,400
Right.
will actually they might get $400 more a bunch of times. So that's an example of how you play with those arrays. Unique to every organization. And again, anyone here, you want me to talk about your gift array, just go. And then Jen, I just want to thank you once again for bringing up next after. Just the way it sounds, next after, one word jumbled together. Great research hub.
And then we had a question also from Daniel, and as he stated, it's from a novice. But what's the best way to start people off who don't like to donate money? So I guess this is more on the acquisition side of all the things you've talked about, moving them along that longitude towards true engagement. So what do you say to a question like that?
Okay, so just one, be really careful. I don't say buying or buying into the idea that they don't like to donate money, because um, people do like to donate money. Now, can they donate that amount you asked? Is today the right day? Do I have a lot of bills due? Okay, we understand all that. So people will donate money. So just be really careful not to provide options that exclude potential giving. So organizations that fail, for example, to do a polite appeal to their volunteers. Okay, please be sure that you're also listening to your volunteers. Having said that, one of the easiest things that you can do to get people started to be building trust and engaging with your organization is ask them to serve as social media ambassadors. So a group of 20 people, maybe you've selected a group of people that you see have some capacity, and say, will you be a social media ambassador for our cause? Okay. This is a very, very scary thing, but research has shown that millennials feel that their social network is more valuable than their money. Terrifying to fundraisers. Having said that, if you can get a millennial or Gen Z supporter to share on their social media, you have passed a key psychological barrier that in everything I've ever done is highly associated with people ultimately giving. Okay.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
a great way to get people started.
And if people were listening to all of this and then still thinking, well, yeah, but what's the one thing I can do? What's the one thing that will change everything that's happening in my office right now so I can try and put all this into practice? What's maybe one takeaway that you'd give people?
Okay, I'm going to give you the 4 things based on the stages. For your brand new transactional donors, make giving easy. On the relationship side, tell your story with impact and tell the donor story. On the lifestyle side, create VIP experiences that bring donors on the inside. And on the transformation side, ask a question and shut up and listen. You do
Perfect.
those 4 things, you're going to raise a lot of money.
Thank you so much, Brian, for all of this. Really, really awesome. Thank you to everybody who's joined us live and to the people who are watching this afterwards. You know now how to reach Brian and why you should. So we really appreciate all of this. I also wanted to thank, of course, our sponsor, DonorSearch, both for this entire series, but also for sponsoring sessions like this one, which are so valuable to making sure we're doing the right things in the right ways for the people who love the same things we do. To Jack, our producer, Jack Frost. And I want to encourage you to reach out to any of us with questions and comments and to fill out the survey you're going to see immediately as you leave today. Really important to making sure you get the content you want and need in the future. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing you all hopefully as soon as next week. And until then, take care. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Jane. Jack.